So I'm really excited to be here today. I'll put up the welcome slide, and to be with you guys in London. You know, if anybody follows me on Twitter, @WeaverWorks, I often will follow tweets of really exciting things that are happening here in the London community and in the broader London area. And you guys are a powerhouse. It's amazing, you know, not only the tweets that Pillar puts out there, but I guess I must follow some other folks or they get retweeted by Chris Moss. There's so much going on in the London community, and so it's really exciting. It's going to be, I think, a great day to kind of dive in a little bit deeper on collective impact, but particularly around the three priority areas that that Pillar has identified. We're going to hear a little bit more today about what's happening in London around poverty, particularly in the Prince's Seeing is Believing initiative. We're going to hear about campus community partnerships and also about social innovation through shared space. So those are the three themes that are going to drive our work. But before you hear a little bit more about collective impact, I know that at each of your tables, there might be some people you know and other people that you don't know. So we're going to throw it over to you for a few minutes to have a bit of a table discussion. We'd like you to answer this question. Why is it important that you're here today? So to think about it for a minute or two, and then to turn to the partner that you're sitting beside at the table, or if there's uneven numbers at your table in groups of 3, and then just try to answer this question and share with each other why it's important that you're here. Hopefully you've been able to meet a couple of other folks at your table. I'm going to ask Maureen to go around with a handheld mic. Does anyone want to share kind of the theme of the discussion that they had about why it's important that they're here today? We'll take a couple of folks that might want to share.
Is there a show of hands? Someone that would like to share? This is, as it says here, think, pair, and share. Yes, Gail. All right. Here you go, Gail.
Boiled it down to everybody at this table believes that we can make our community better.
All right.
Oh, great. Good. Thanks, Gail.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh,
Michael.
Can I just grab this guy first, just in logistics?
Everybody at our table is here to learn and to collaborate.
Fabulous. And you are David.
David Glenn.
Great.
Thanks, David.
Michael.
Michael Shapcott from Wellesley Institute in Toronto. I'm here with my colleague April. We always come to London to be inspired, to engage with interesting people like Pillar Nonprofit, but also our partners, the Chamber of Commerce, Jerry and the gang at the Chamber, and to see what wonderful and inspiring initiatives you guys are doing, and then steal those ideas and take them back with us to Toronto, because we need all the ideas we can get back in Toronto.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to have you here. Any other hands? Yes, yes, yes. I'm going to get my exercise.
Yep, today.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Natalie with Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, and at our table we realized that none of us can do everything, and we can't be the best at everything, but we can find out who's the best at that thing that we're not the best at.
Wow, great. Thank you.
All right. So
Yeah.
everybody's good at something. Yes, just got to find that other piece.
Maybe one more from this side of the room. We've got
Okay.
someone back there.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Marcia.
Hi there. What I had said was I'm here to learn about the things we're already doing and learn about new things we can do. And as we're sitting here, we discovered that we have Katie here who works at Museum London, came to London from Acton to go to Huron College, then went to continuing studies for the nonprofit management, has a job in London, working at Museum London, and wants to do great things in our community. So great example of collaboration and great things happening already.
Great. Oops.
And she went to Fanshawe too.
Oh, right. See, this was part of our wisdom, right?
Yes.
To make sure that you had a voice from the college and a voice from the university at every table. And
Yes.
look at, now they're hugging.
May I just add, I didn't coerce my team to talk about me at the table. It was their idea, not mine.
And it's always great because Katie's boss is here.
Oh, good.
Right.
From Museum London.
Yes. Anybody else over on this side?
One more.
One more? No?
Nope.
Okay. Going.
Good. Well, thanks, Maureen, and thank you guys for sharing. I think it is really exciting, as Michael said, to be in London with you guys. At Tamarack, we do a lot of R&D, which is rip off and duplicate, right? So we like to come to a lot of communities and do our R&D as well, just like the folks at the Wellesley Institute. So I'm going to just take you through a little bit of a presentation about, the difference between collaboration and collective impact. And I know that you were sent an article that appeared in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in the winter of 2011 by colleagues of Tamarack's at FSG Social Impact Consultants. The authors of the article were two guys named John Kania and Mark Kramer, and I'll talk about the theory behind the article. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself, so you can see how I am situated within all of this work. I started my career at McMaster University. I worked in the Alumni and Development Office there, and that job was great because I got to work with alumni from across the country and also from different faculties and from different years. And it's, really interesting to work. We have a theme today on campus community partnerships, and it's really interesting to work in that kind of environment and really continue to build that relationship that started while they were students into, a strong alumni for that institution. And I think it is one of those parts of campus community partnerships that we haven't explored as much as we could. From there, I went to be the executive director of Volunteer Hamilton, which is a lot like many volunteer centers. But one of the unique things that we did at Volunteer Hamilton was we developed a program called Bay Area Leadership. And that was my first opportunity to bring business, government, and voluntary sector leaders together to really start to explore the challenges that were facing the communities of Hamilton and Burlington, and how could we collectively begin to address those challenges. And we had, in our program, we had people like the Chief of Police of the City of Hamilton, and we had counselors from the City of Burlington, and people from banks and from not-for-profit organizations. So it's a really exciting opportunity to launch that program that's now been running for about 10 years in Hamilton and Burlington. I then moved on to the YWCA, a fairly large nonprofit organization in Hamilton, about a $9.5 million annual budget, and delivered programs across 9 sites. But I was drawn back into this kind of really interesting cross-sector community collaboration, which is now known as the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. And we'll hear a little bit more from Tom Cooper later this morning about the Hamilton Roundtable. But it was, again, an opportunity to bring business, government, voluntary sector leaders, and people with the lived experience of poverty to the same table to talk about an issue that was vexing the community, this issue of poverty. And could this community wrap its arms around the issue and try to really move the needle on it? We didn't know at the time in this work that we were actually working under a collective impact framework, but we learned that later on. From Hamilton, I moved to Tamarack and am doing this work across Canada now with communities that are really interested in poverty reduction. And I have to say, London is one of our vibrant community partners. We initially worked with 13 cities across Canada over 10 years, and now we're scaling up to 100 cities. And our belief is that if you can bring 100 cities together, we have 8 of 10 provinces and 3 territories with poverty reduction strategies. We have the capacity, we just need the will, that we can actually change the lives for 1 million Canadians. And that's our vision through Tamarack and through our partners at Vibrant Communities. For those of you that don't know very much about Tamarack, Tamarack, as Maureen said, is an institute for community engagement, and our mission is really the co-generation of knowledge for social change. And what we believe is that the knowledge exists in all these communities. It exists here in London. You guys are doing innovative and creative work on the ground, but so often that knowledge stays in the communities. And so Tamarack is in a unique place where we can pull the knowledge and the experience of people across Canada internationally internationally to really look at what's happening that's really successful, what are promising practices, and then how do we scale some of that change. And that's really Tamarac's core role. And we do this through supporting 3 learning communities, one around poverty reduction, the Vibrant Communities Initiative, one around neighborhood revitalization called Seeking Community, and then one around practitioner work. So we know that if you're working at social change from the community level, it's hard work, and so we really focus on the supports we can provide to practitioners. So that gives you a little bit of context of who I am and the path that I've taken. It's not a very direct path, and when my kids ask me what do, I say I talk to a lot of people. They say, well, do you get anything accomplished? And I say, I hope so, but it is one of those roles where you can both talk to people but engage with the issues that they're trying to change in their communities. So I'm going to show a really quick video. This was done by the Community Foundation in Cincinnati, and it's actually pretty relevant for London because the video will show something that is unique to the Thames River here in London. So if I can ask my colleague to hit the video. It's a very short one. So in many ways, collective impact is about that. It's about pulling together in the same direction, right? And really focusing on the core conditions. Before we dive too deep into collective impact, though, I wanted to share with you what we talk about a lot at Tamarack, which is this notion of a collaboration continuum. And probably you've seen versions of this collaboration continuum in a number of other presentations that you've gone to. What we really like about this continuum is the fact that competition is included as part of the collaboration continuum, because competition is very real in collective work. We're competing for funding, we're competing for attention, we're competing for that space that is the space that is also part of our collective work. Some people, I was just in New Zealand, and people said to me in New Zealand that actually competition should be woven all the way through the different iterations of the collaboration continuum, and they're probably right about that. At the far end of the continuum, when we do have much more of this kind of competition mindset, we're more loosely coupled together as organizations, and there is more turf that exists. As we start to move up the collective or the collaboration continuum, what we have to do is we have to build in intentionality around building trustful relationships. And so often what happens in collaboration is that we dive right into the work. The pressure is is on. The funding is very short term, and we know that we've agreed to these kinds of outcomes, so we dive right into the work trying to get to those kind of outcomes. But you can see on this version of the collaboration continuum that as you start to work together, coordinate your efforts, you might start to collaborate a bit more. You might even start to look at, can we integrate our services? You've really got to, pay attention to trust building activities because you are more tightly coupled together. So, we're going to now talk about collective impact. And how many of you had a chance to, or know about collective impact, or had a chance to read the article in advance of the session today? It wasn't required reading, so don't feel bad if you didn't get to it. When John Caney and Mark Kramer first wrote this article, in their research prior to the article, they were asked by foundations to really look at, to scan, what's happening across the United States, and to scan and see, how foundations were funding work and what were the results that were occurring. And what they found for the most part was that funding came in an isolated kind of way, that funders would grant to single organizations, to single initiatives in a community, and that they would get isolated kind of impacts, that these things were not joined up together, and that funders were often removed from the process. But also, as they were doing that research, they started to see a couple of shining lights, that, there were these collective approaches where it wasn't a single organization, but it was a group of organizations not only collaborating around a table, but trying to get their arms wrapped around a more vexing community problem, a more complex community problem like poverty or educational attainment or environmental change. And so they started to look at those kinds of initiatives, and they said, well, what is unique about those initiatives? And these were initiatives that they considered to be collective impact initiatives. And they saw a couple of core things that came out of those initiatives. That in fact, the tables were more collective, that they did have multiple partners from different sectors working at those tables, that they were looking at complex community issues, and they recognized that it couldn't be only about the delivery of programs and services, but it had to be that collective effort that really drove the change forward. And that funders were becoming more embedded in the process, that they weren't, stepping back and saying, here's your funding, that in fact, that they, in some cases, they were walking alongside the initiatives that were going on, these collective impact initiatives that were going on in the United States and Canada. Collective impact as a framework, and that's how we think about it at Tamarack right now. It's really kind of an emerging body of practice, and it's a really useful framework to look at our collective work in communities. There's lots of emerging examples across a whole variety of domains, not only in Canada, but also in the United States. And we've seen it emerge in health and teen pregnancy, in educational achievement, in poverty reduction, and in community safety, to name a few. After the paper was written by John Caney and Mark Kramer, President Obama got elected into the White House, and this was during his first term. And he actually convened a White House Council on Community Change. So he brought about 40 leaders together. John Bon Jovi was one of the members of the White House Council, for those of you that like music, but it was really cross-sector. And they wanted to actually dive a little bit deeper into this notion of collective impact. And so they put together, they looked at 12 initiatives in the United States, and they said, well, how are these initiatives working, and what could we learn from their experience? And they identified these 5 questions that are really important to think about if we're going to dive into this collective impact work. How do we know that it's not just about collaboration, but we're trying to move up to the next level? So the first question is, do we aim to move the needle on the issue by more than 10%? It's a really, really interesting question because there's 2 parts to it. One, you're committing to make a appreciable change on something that might be challenging your community. So it might be reducing poverty, it might be increasing high school graduation rates, it might be decreasing teen pregnancy rates in the community. But what that also says, that first question, is we have to understand what that issue is all about. So we need data up front to tell us who's in that experience in our community before we can tackle the issue. And, you know, some activities like these collaboration forums are an opportunity to explore some of these issues. You need data, and then you also need to know, as Maureen did, that community mapping. So who's already doing what in the community, and how can we leverage what's already happening, the capacity that already exists in the community, to move forward the change. The second question that they ask collective impact initiatives to consider is, you know, are we really going to focus on a long-term investment, right? And 3 to 5 years is what they suggest. Often funding is much shorter than that. There's often 1-year funding that is available to organizations. And so 3 to 5 years is really a signal to say, we're going to give ourselves enough time to think about this issue, to do the research, to really inform the issue appropriately, and then to figure out what is our collective strategy moving forward. The next one, the next question that they ask is, do we really believe that multi-sector engagement is going to be helpful? And that's, I think, a critical question as well, because we all hold a piece of the answer to the question, whatever problem we're trying to address in our community, but we don't hold the whole answer. So how do we bring in the corporate sector? How do we bring in, you know, the government sector? What are the relationships that we have to build with citizens in our community to really get their engagement in this issue as well? How do we bring in the campus partnerships and the campus resources or the faith community? So do we really believe that that will help us move the needle on the issue? And then, again, that question about measurable data. So not only do we have the data informing it at the front end, but how are we going to know that we're actually going to be successful? What's the data that we're going to track over the 3 to 5 years that we're engaged in this work that will really show that we're making progress? And it's kind of interesting, in the examples that I'm going to share with you under the 5 conditions of collective impact, you'll see that in a very short period of time, a lot of these initiatives have made pretty substantial progress, but they focused on the data, right? They really did say, we're going to say that these are the indicators that we're going to track, and we're going to do activities that will help move those indicators. So it's not about random action, it's about really focused action around those indicators. And then finally, do we believe that communities should be involved in it? And I think that, you know, I often say, because I was involved with the Hamilton Roundtable, that 40 people sitting around a roundtable looking at the issue of poverty will never solve the issue of poverty. It's when the community really engages, when the media talks about, you know, Code Red and the impact of poverty on the city of Hamilton, when the business community looks at, you know, the laddering of jobs so that there are employment opportunities for everyone in the community, you know, when we get the funders aligning their funding around poverty reduction, that's actually when the magic happens, and that when you get real community change. So this isn't in the initial article, but this is in their Channeling Change article that FSG produced. They actually say that collective impact initiatives happen over 4 phases. And, you know, as I said, with collaboration, we often dive right in. With collective impact, what we've noticed is that you have to spend time in that idea generation phase, that is a really critical phase for this work, to really bring different voices to the table and to really get a strong understanding of the issue that you're trying to move the needle on. The idea generation phase, phase 1, usually takes about 4 to 6 months in a community to really make sure that you're bringing as many voices and engaging as many voices. Phase 2 is when you move from idea generation into actually developing a community plan for moving forward. And that phase can take, you know, these things don't don't run in sequence, they kind of run together, but that can take another 6 to 8 months to a year to develop a really strong plan with lots of buy-in by a whole variety of partners. And then the next 2 phases are when you actually start to roll out your plan. So they take you between, 2 and 5 years for the next 2 phases. And I think that that's some really helpful work to think about how collective impact evolves over time. In the initial paper, John Kania and Mark Kramer identified 3 important preconditions for collective impact work. And they've written about this in the initial paper, but actually haven't circled back to it. But it is one that we found at Tamarack. These 3 preconditions are very critical to the success of a collective impact initiative. So the first precondition is this notion of influential champions. And it's really, who do you bring around the table in your design phase, in your conversation phase, that can really help you, get buy-in, get larger buy-in from the community. And it's not only about the influential champions, but it's also about them bringing their sphere of influence. So if you're working on educational attainment, so if you're working on, let's say, trying to move the needle on high school graduation rates, of course you want the Board of Education at the table, the director of the Board of Education at the table, but you want the whole board, because you want to understand, what are the systems in place within the educational system that are preventing kids from graduating from high school. You want the parent councils involved in this. You want to get down to the parents. So it's really thinking about, not only who do we need around the table, but what is the sphere of influence that they're going to bring to the work. The second important precondition is this notion of urgency around the issue. So is the issue urgent and important to the community? Because if it is, then the community is going to buy in and they're going to step up to the plate a lot quicker. If it's something that isn't seen to be urgent and important, then it takes a lot more time to build that kind of will, and you need more data to be able to say, this issue is important. When we were doing the work around poverty reduction at the City of Hamilton, we started about 7 years ago, and I have to say that poverty wasn't on the table at that time, but there was one thing that happened that kind of reframed it. So there was a report that was presented in front of City Council on incomes and poverty. And it was that report that had the mayor say, wow, there's a great divide between people that are living in poverty and other people that are earning relatively decent incomes in the City of Hamilton. And we started to see the data started to show the gap in the city. And that report, it seems like it's a very small kind of thing, but it was that report that created that urgency in the community. Sometimes it can be something that's much more impactful. In one community where I did some work in the United States, they had a high teen suicide rate. In the last month, they'd had 4 kids that had committed suicide. And so that was compelling to them, and that created a real sense of urgency for them moving forward on a collective impact initiative. And then the final precondition of collective impact is adequate resources. And this really says, what are the resources that we need if we're in phase 1? What research do we need? What funding do we need? I often say that it's, not, you shouldn't bite off the whole collective impact elephant in your first bite. Think about the phases and really think through what are the resources that will be helpful as you move forward. So as we said, collective impact is really moving from the isolated impact specialized agendas to this notion of a common agenda. It's moving from fragmented measurements to this notion of shared measurement. And these are actually the conditions of collective impact, which I'm going to go through in more detail. So the first condition of collective impact, we heard about the 3 preconditions. There are 5 conditions of collective impact in the framework. So the first condition is this notion of a common agenda. So what is holding us together? What are we agreeing to move the needle on? And how are we going to frame that issue? So if it's an issue like poverty or homelessness, that's a huge issue to wrap your head around. So what specifically do you want to focus on within your community and within the folks that are sitting around the table? You've really got to define the issue, but also just detail the strategy that you're going to move forward on. And the other thing that is really critical in terms of the common agenda is agreeing to how you're going to work together, because it is really hard work, this community change work, as we all know, and really understanding, the values that are the values and the principles that are going to hang you together will make your collective impact initiative successful over the longer term. I'm going to tell you the story of Tillamook County because it's a really good illustration of the common agenda piece. So in Tillamook County in Oregon, they had the highest rate of teen pregnancy. You can see on the graph there that they were higher than any other county in Oregon. And so public health, that was their compelling issue. So public health said, let's bring people around the table and let's see if we can wrap our minds around this and reduce the number of teens getting pregnant by more than 10%. So they didn't have a shared agenda when they started. And then they started to talk in the various groups that they brought around the table that, maybe our common agenda is to reduce the number of teens giving birth. But the problem with that common agenda was that it left out the faith communities, because the faith communities in Tillamook County wanted to talk about abstinence, right? So they couldn't be at the table. So finally, they moved from reducing the number of teenagers giving birth to reducing the number of teenagers getting pregnant. And all partners could agree to that common agenda. They were wildly successful, as you can see by the graph. They had the YMCAs and the YWCAs doing lots of pro-social teen engagement activities. They had the churches preaching abstinence, public health talking about sexual education, and the school boards engaged. They were very, very successful. They were so successful that they decided that they had achieved their goal and they abandoned the collective effort. What happened when they finished their collective effort is that what actually happened is that the teen pregnancy rates went up again in Tillamook County and were higher than the teen pregnancy rates when they first started. So it really says that they had people at the table that were committed to the issue, but they didn't have the influential champions who were committed over the longer term. And that's where the initiative fell down. But you can see how a common agenda can be a very influential factor. And getting agreement around a common agenda, while we think it might be easy, it's not that easy. We've really got to work at how can we frame the issue in a way that is as inclusive as many partners as possible. Some of the things to think about in terms of building a common agenda is there a prior history of collaboration in the community? And we know in London, for sure there is. Is that history positive or negative? That will have an impact on building a common agenda. What are some of what is the pressing issue that we want to bring the community around? And does the community see that as important and relevant to them? Who's the core group that's going to convene us together? And what resources do they have to bring us together? And are they connected to people who have a sphere of influence? So these are the kinds of conditions that you want to build into your thinking when you're building a common agenda. This next slide is a slide that I really love. It's Francis Ford Coppola is a very famous American director, and he was once asked, what's the difference between making a good movie and a bad movie? And he's made both good movies and bad movies. Some of you might say he's made a lot of bad movies, but he would say that the difference between making a good movie and a bad movie is when everybody makes the same movie. And that's really what we're trying to do in this really large-scale community change, is trying to get everybody to make the same movie, around the issue that we think is important to our community. So I think it's a great visual image, because you have actors and directors and, key grips and all these folks, and you could very easily stray from making the same movie. So that's what a common agenda is all about. The second condition of collective impact is this idea of shared measurement. And I think this is where it is a game changer, right? It's a game changer from collaboration to collective impact. What are those measures that we're going to agree on that show that we are making progress on this issue? And how are we going to build in time where we can make sense of those measures and that we can really start to see that we are making progress, that the community is moving forward. So shared measurement has those components to it. I'm going to tell you about Strive in Cincinnati. It's a cradle to career educational attainment initiative. And it's really the poster child in many ways for collective impact. So Strive is a group, there are over 300 partners in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky that are gathered together, and their goal is that every child that is born in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky enters school ready to learn, so goes into kindergarten ready to learn, is successful during the school years and is supported inside and out of school during those school years, graduates from high school, enrolls in college and university in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky, graduates from college and university in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky, and then gets a job in the area. So they need to have all partners, a number of partners along that continuum. It's really quite a intense collective impact example. This, the top of the slide really shows you how they're working together. So this is how their collective impact, these are the 4 core streams of the collective impact initiative. And at the bottom of the slide, you see kind of a snake that snakes across the screen. That's actually their shared measurement pathway. They have 72 measures that they track on an annual basis, and there are 15 key measures that, that they are following. And they report out annually on their progress. What you've seen with Strive in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky is that since 2003, they have seen an increase in high school graduation rates since 2003. So they haven't been at this work very long, but they've seen a 10% increase in high school graduation rates, and they've also seen a 16% increase in college enrollment. And 40 of the 72 measures, they have seen remarkable progress in their initiative. So collective impact is a lot of work, but what we're seeing even in these early days of this work is really appreciable results that are occurring in communities that take this initiative on. At Tamarack, we started to look with our Vibrant Communities work around poverty reduction. We started to tease out this notion of shared measurement a number of years ago. And we believe that population level measures are important, but we also see that that there are other levels of measures that we need to weave into our programs, and we actually call it our 4 Ps. So we think that there are some process measures. If we are really about bringing different voices to the table, how are we going to measure that, and how are we going to measure our community engagement? So those are process measures. Then there are progress measures. So is new funding coming into the community as a result of this collective effort? And you know, what's interesting about collective impact is that it attracts a lot of funding and resources into the community. So that's a really important measure. And then we also have seen when we bring together communities that are working on poverty across Canada, that there's policy changes that happen. So when we started the work around poverty reduction 10 years ago, at Tamarack, there was only 1 province with a poverty reduction strategy, and now there are 8 of 10 provinces and 3 territories with poverty reduction strategies. Now, it wasn't only the collaborative roundtables that had an influence in this, there were many other partners, but you can see the impact of policy change. But policy change doesn't only happen at the big P level, it also happens at the small p level. So organizations that are sitting around these tables, business partners, government, really look at how they change their internal systems and their internal processes, because they begin to identify some of the barriers that are really preventing people from moving forward successfully. And that's when you have the director of education and the business community looking at educational attainment. They have a shared outcome that, you know, in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky, they're going to be a very competitive city once all these kids, you know, go through the pathway that Strive has set for them. The third condition of collective impact is this idea of mutually reinforcing activities. So you've got your common agenda, then you say, okay, we're going to measure our success in this way. The third thing that you want to think about is what are those activities that we're going to focus on that are really going to help us get those measures, get progress on those measures, and really move the needle on the common agenda. This is just an example of a community where they've really thought through coordination of their work. And, you know, it's interesting, this initiative in St. John, New Brunswick is a poverty reduction initiative that was started by the business community. So the story behind it is that there was a gentleman who was walking to lunch with his business colleagues, and he stopped because there was an individual who asked him for money in a doorway. And so instead of walking by or just giving him a little bit of money, he actually engaged that individual in a conversation. And that conversation struck him that when he went to meet his business colleagues, he started to talk about how some people in St. John were doing really well and that there were other people in the community that weren't doing quite as well. And that led to the development of the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative. And the Business Community Anti-Poverty Initiative had an initial goal of reducing poverty in St. John, New Brunswick. They were at a poverty rate in the city of 27%. And in the province, the poverty rate was 17%. And that was their initial goal. They wanted to get down to the provincial average. And so you can see in the graph that in fact they've achieved that goal and now they're continuing to do their work. They've really focused on some core areas: housing, transportation, education to employment, neighborhood revitalization, workforce development, and early childhood development. And they see those investments as critical investments to the prosperity of St. John. This is the Hamilton Roundtable. The aspiration of the Hamilton Roundtable is to make Hamilton the best place to raise a child. And when you have, 26% of your kids living in families that live in poverty, you're not the best place to raise a child. But the aspiration is a door opener for many people into the poverty conversation. And just like the Strive kind of worm that goes across the bottom of the pathway, this is a pathway. So the theory of change is that there are 5 critical points of investment in the lives of children, youth, and their families. And if you can get the community invested in these 5 critical points, you can change the trajectory for kids and youth. And so the critical points are the early years, the school years, high school graduation, leading into employment, and asset building, wealth creation. And so the Roundtable's role is to bring the community, to align all the efforts that are going on in the community around these 5 critical points. And in 1 year, the Roundtable was successful in levering $27 million in poverty reduction funding across the city of Hamilton, which is pretty significant impact. The fourth condition of collective impact is this notion of continuous communication. So you can imagine, got lots of people sitting around a table, they're all coming from a whole variety of different perspectives. You're trying to really work on a very tough issue that is challenging your community. There's going to be differences of opinions about how you're going to move one way or the other. Or there may be opportunities that present themselves that you hadn't anticipated, and then you've got to figure out, okay, so is this something we want to jump on, or is it fitting within the work that we're doing? So continuous communication is a really critical part of collective impact work, and I think one that John Kania and Mark Kramer really recognized when they put the framework together. This is an example of continuous communication. It's Karelia, Finland, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to decrease the rates of heart disease in Karelia. And so they really focused on communications as the key driver of their collective impact initiative. And communications, in their opinion, took multiple forms, right? So it was face-to-face, it was Twitter, it was newspapers, it was both programs on TV, but also television advertisements. It was small group coffee shop meetings. It was large group sessions like this. And they were able to successfully decrease their heart disease rate. The final condition of collective impact is a backbone. And you know, often when we're engaged in collaborative work, we all sit around a table and it's only a small part of all the other things that we're doing in our jobs. And John Caney and Mark Kramer really saw that if you invest in a small staffing component whose job it is to work with the table to drive the collective impact initiative forward, that you actually will see much more success in the initiative. It's kind of like the building manager on the construction site, right? He makes sure that the trades all show up at the right time so that the house is built on time and on budget. And that's really what a backbone's role is. It's the role to, you know, build public will. It's the role to hold that vision, to make sure that the measurements are happening, to make sure that the activities are being aligned. Recently, FSG and the Cincinnati Community Foundation looked at 6 backbone initiatives, 6 collective impact initiatives in Cincinnati, and they wanted to see, you know, was this investment in a backbone, because it's a new kind of investment for funders to consider, was it actually making a difference? And what they found was that indeed it was, right? That the backbone actually drove the initiative to greater success on a shorter timeline. That they shared strength in really the mutually aligned activities, the mutually reinforcing activities, but that it was challenging for backbones to really focus on data because, you know, we're not as good at really pulling the data apart and getting a good shared understanding of what that data means. And so that was a real challenge for backbone organizations. Beyond the backbone, there are a number of roles and a number of players in collective impact work. At the center is this notion that the community is buying in and that the community is engaged in the initiative overall. And that the community owns it. That they're really, you know, they really believe that campus community partnerships are the way to go, and that the campus community and then the external community is working together to try to get that moving in one direction. There's usually a convening organization. In this case, Pillar in some ways has played the role of convening all of you together and convening you around these 3 critical issues. So there's usually some lead organization in a community, whether it's a United Way or a municipal government or a community foundation or another organization in the community that convenes the initial table. There's a fiscal sponsor who holds some of the money for the funding of the collective impact initiative. The backbone is usually a small staffing component. That's been our experience in Canada, that the backbone is often quite small. In the United States, the Strive initiative has 15 people that are employed at their backbone, but they have big resources in the United States. So the context is a little bit different between Canada and the US. And then there's usually a leadership table. So, you know, some people from the different sectors that are sitting around a leadership table. There might be a smaller subgroup of a steering committee, and then there are working groups that really are there to take on specific initiatives that might help move the initiative forward, move the collective impact initiative forward in one way or another. So, what are some things to think about if you want to say, you know, we think we're working in collective impact, or if you're a funder, we think we might want to, you know, move the community in this area. Here's some things to really think about. Collective impact, as we said, you know, it's a pretty long-term investment, so it really does require patient capital. And, you know, when you're bringing different people from different sectors together and citizens around a really complex community issue, like poverty, like social innovation, like campus community partnerships, you've got to build in enough time so that they can build the relationships. We might think that those relationships pre-exist, but they don't. So that takes time and that takes patient capital. That there also is, you have to have this persistence and this focus on long-term policy change agenda, because that's where you can actually scale pretty significant change. In Alberta, they've just announced the 3 elements of their poverty reduction strategy for the province of Alberta. And the first one is to eliminate child poverty in 5 years. Well, you can tell if they are able to eliminate child poverty in 5 years, that's going to give us lots of other momentum across Canada around poverty reduction. You know, that in and of itself will be telling to all different kinds of governments and all of us that are engaged in this kind of work. So persistence is really important, and then paying attention to these policy change levers that appear once you're starting to do the work. The other thing to recognize is that you start off in one place and something happens and it takes you not necessarily in a totally different direction, but it's something that you can lever much more quickly. So when we were doing this work in Hamilton, we were working at the roundtable, and then there was a group of business leaders that started a Jobs Prosperity Collaborative. That didn't exist at the very beginning of the roundtable, but it was surely a great opportunity for us to connect into. So the things, the initiatives will change over time, and interventions will change over time as well. It does, collective impact really does legitimize the work of the collaborative table. So it is about paying attention. It is about looking at impact. What is the impact? What is the change that we want to see in our communities? And then the final one, I was just in Portland, Maine, and working with some folks who were thinking about food security in a hunger-free York County in Maine, and they said, okay, so if you can just tell us what the playbook is, we'll, have all the answers. Well, there isn't really a playbook because community context really drives a lot of the thinking around this. So you can think about the 3 preconditions and the 5 conditions, but then it has to be London-oriented. Right? Because the people that you have in London, the resources that you have, the collaborative relationships that pre-exist in London, the relationships that you have with the corporate community and the media and the university and the college and the other folks, those are all going to be particular to this community. And so the playbook, we can say these are the elements, but the way that the actual plays happen will be very contextual to London. So some final kind of thinking about it. Again, if I were to say what are the things about collective impact that really strike me as game changers, it's this thing about data. We really do need to use data much more practically, both to inform how we're developing our common agenda, but also to show that we're making progress and that we're having an impact. And that data can be very, very powerful. But you don't have to do it alone. There's lots of people that are already collecting data in the community. The school boards, the municipalities, the university, the colleges. There's lots of the chambers of commerce. They all collect data of one sort or another. And what you've got to do is to say, where does that data exist? And then how do we get access to it? Or are they willing to share that information with us? I think the other thing to think about is that collective impact is just another tool in the toolkit, right? So to think about, what are we doing well already in terms of these 3 preconditions and 5 conditions, and where do we have to improve? And then finally, to really learn about what's working well. So to spend time not only doing the work, which is really important, but also that reflective time about what's happening successfully in London and what are the things that maybe aren't successful, but we've been doing them forever and have never asked ourselves the question, well, why are we doing them? Is that the right strategy to get at that complex problem? Or is there another strategy that could be far more impactful and far more powerful? And that's a scary question sometimes to ask. Is there a strategy that can be more impactful and more powerful? Because it might mean that as organizations, we have to course correct to do our work. But if the strategy is going to be more impactful and more powerful and actually help change the lives of the people that we're serving, then it is really the right strategy. And so it is about thinking and working differently in many ways. So that gives you an idea of collective impact. We're now going to have you do a little bit of a think, pair, share around your table. So what have you learned in that really brief presentation that you can bring back to some of the collaborative work that you're already engaged in, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Are there any questions, or do people want to share what the flavor of the discussion was at their table? So we can either answer number one or the second question.
Could I just open it with sort of a collective?
Sure.
We decided at our table, rather than talking in pairs, that we would talk collectively.
Sure.
And we had great impact. One of the things that we talked about was, of course, the sharing of the resources, that, everybody has a certain amount of resources, and bringing those together that you might not know about. But the other piece that we spoke about, and this is something that you'll hear more about with the Prince's Seeing is Believing program later today, is trying to ensure that you have the voice of lived experience when you are dealing with issues. And that could be on a creative level, whether we're dealing with campus community, or it could be when you want to get out and you want to talk about the shared space idea. People that have the experience, it's always good. But if you're addressing poverty, there are so many dimensions to it. And it's great for people in public, private, and nonprofit sectors to talk about it, but you are talking in isolation unless you have those stakeholders who can speak to the issue from a personal perspective and help you through that dialogue. So that's something that resonated at our table.
Yeah, and I think that that's where the condition of continuous communication is a really critical one, because we often don't, we're very comfortable in our processes, right? However, how we meet, where we meet, the time that we meet, all those kinds of things, and the amount of time we give to these things. And one of the things that I learned when I was in Hamilton was when you bring the business community and people with the lived experience to the table, you've got to think about, when you're meeting, how you're sharing voice, what are the processes that you're going to put into, to really authentically engage everyone around the table and to make sure that it's pretty much a level playing field for everybody. So that's really important in terms of continuous communication.
Okay. So here we have somebody. Great. Louise.
We talked about shared measurement. Is Janet Tuft in the room? I think I saw her. Yes. I'm one of the individuals who, at one of our United Way meetings, when we started to talk about shared measurement, had a reaction. Not a very positive one, I might say. So I'm having some insights. So the question is, what have I learned? So I'm having some insights around the shared measurement piece, and appreciate where you're coming from. And I also go to the place of, I'm the ED of a small organization. I have barely any resources I don't even have a data management system. Mm-hmm. It's all manual. And I get scared. Right? And so how do you make sure that those small organizations who want to be at the table, who know they're having tremendous impact, we've been around for 38 years, how do you make sure you have a voice, right? And you don't get left behind. So how do you engage in the process in a way that's positive and moves that collective impact agenda forward?
Yeah. So shared measurement is a really scary part of it, but I think it's such a critical part of it. And I think the lesson that I've learned is that you don't have to do it alone, that there are people that are already, sifting through that data. And you've got to be able to say, okay, so is this data relevant for me and my organization and the work that I'm doing? And what would be really helpful to me and my organization and the work that I'm doing, who's already collecting the data? That whole R&D piece, right? Rip off and duplicate. But people who have access to data actually want to see it be impactful. And it's also, I think, the other part about data is only data until we start to make sense of it. Right? And it is that making sense of it, and that's where you can play a really important role, because you can say, here's our experience of the services and programs that we're delivering in the community. Here's what the data says, and either they're aligned or they're at a gap. And that's where the sense making is a very critical component of this. There is one little piece of data. So when I was doing this poverty reduction work, I'll just tell you a little story and then I'll turn it back to you. So I was sitting at a table with folks from the school board and they said to me, yeah, if kids graduate, if they have 16 credits by the time they're 16 years old, they have a higher percentage of being able to graduate. And at that point in time, my son was 16 years old, right? He was in grade 10, he was 16 years old. And I just thought to myself, wow, that is a really valuable piece of information, piece of data for me to use as a parent to make sure that my son had 16 credits by the time he was, 16 years old. Now, if every parent knew that, would that change some of the decision making that parents have when their kids are in grade 10? And then will that have an impact on educational outcomes and high school graduation rates? I don't know. That would be a question that I would ask, but there's really important pieces of information out there that we need to wrap ourselves around and think, okay, how is this informing the work that I'm trying to do as an organization in the community?
I just wanted to take the opportunity. It was Louise with the Sexual Assault Center who was talking about struggling without a database management system. So I just want to throw it out there in the interest of collaboration that if anybody knows a way to help Louise with that issue, find her. Yeah. Louise with Sexual Assault Center. You're welcome.
Perfect. I think we've got some, over here. Okay, go.
So at our group, we had two common things that we just wanted to share. First, we felt that there was a bit of a disconnect in terms of communicating what everybody does and how as a community we understand that. So we only go so far. We all know that there's great work being done in this room, but not everybody knows. So that communication piece that you spoke about is really, really critical. And the second piece that we spoke about at our table is that there's a disconnect in the community of understanding that investing in community support, whether it's all these groups, doesn't need to compete with being able to stimulate the economy. That if you can deal with one aspect, so dealing with poverty and homelessness and supporting organizations that are smaller, that in effect is going to make our community stronger from an economic perspective. They don't have to compete. And so therefore the investment can be made on both sides of the equation, and we identified that.
Great, thank you very much.
And, Kate. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Kate.
So, hi, I'm Kate Wiggins. I'm with Women's Community House, which is an emergency shelter service. Okay, yeah, I know it's hard because I think my voice is going, which might be a benefit for most of you in the room as the day ramps up. That was hard to do. Anyway, so this is my question.
Sure.
So we had the conversation about communication and what does get communicated or doesn't. But my question is about, I guess, impact and data, sort of moving, off of what Louise was saying. So we work in the violence against women sector. So depending on who you talk to, there's energy around that issue or not.
Yeah.
There can be denial around that issue. So my question is, I guess, when we have groups of individuals who say, yes, we need data, we need to define impact, et cetera, it seems to me that that conversation happens at a certain level. And for me, I guess, that conversation needs to happen with the people who are most impacted. So, and I think that's our community challenge. We sit at tables as professionals, having great conversations, talking, like the United Way about what is the impact of our service, et cetera, and we categorize where people are going to fall, whether they should be there or not, theoretically. But how often do we actually have meaningful conversations about what it is we're going to gather with the individuals who are experiencing the impact quite directly of an unequal community?
Yeah.
So, sorry.
I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but I would agree with you that you do, whatever issue you're trying to move the needle on, I really, just based on the work that we've done at Tamarack and with the poverty reduction work across Canada, we fundamentally believe that that is critical, that individuals have the lived experience, have to be at the very helpful in identifying barriers that prevent them and their families from being successful. There's a really great story that happened in Hamilton when the government of Ontario was moving forward on the first round of consultations on their poverty reduction strategy. There was a single mom there, and her daughter, and she was on ODSP, and her daughters were saving for post-secondary education. And when they save for post-secondary education, that money gets clawed into the family income. And so there's more barrier if you're on social assistance saving for post-secondary education than if you're a middle-class family and whose kids have a part-time job. And we all know that the data is there. We all know, the research is there, that education is a pathway out of poverty. We all know that. So she was able to tell that story and to talk about what that meant for her kids and her family, and that changed, that legislation got changed, right? So it is really an impactful part of the work that we're doing, where you can identify those barriers, use the data. It's a combination of all these things. Data in and of itself, you know, can only be helpful to some degree. It's when we start to make sense of it, when we start to use the personal stories as well to really illustrate those points that can make it very, very impactful. But it's about having different kinds of conversations, for sure, with people that are experiencing, you know, whatever issue it is, whether it's, you know, around teen pregnancy or health or, you know, whatever issue.
Any other comments or questions?
Over here.
Yep. Marie-Claire.
Hello, Marie-Claire from Goodwill Industries. One of our questions was, you know, how does it happen that a community really can move forward and really gel around an issue? And I came up with the response that it really has to do with leadership. It really does take that person who is able to gather people around a table and really draw them in and facilitate the communication, and not, you know, take over with one agenda, but really listen. But that really is the leadership, and you talked about the backbone person or people who can stick to it. And then on top of that, we had people suggest that, you know, government or you know, municipal government or what have you needs to be at the table, but probably shouldn't be the leader. Do you agree with that idea of leadership being sort of the magic ingredient in terms of getting people together? Or, you know, in a collaborative or collective impact, is it, I mean, we think collective, so lots of people involved.
I think leadership for sure. You know, if you think back to the 3 preconditions, right? Influential leadership is a really important precondition. I'm surprised they haven't written more about it. Maybe that's a role for Tamarack to play, but that is the one thing that we found with the poverty roundtables that we worked with across Canada, is that kind of influential leadership, that champion, the set of champions that you draw into the table are really critical. But the way that you're resilient over the longer term is that when it's beyond that individual, right? When it's embedded in their organization, and their organization is fundamentally committed to also working in this way and really working at community change. The challenge, you know, that our communities are facing for sure is that there's lots of very complex issues that are really challenging, you know, our communities, whether it's poverty, whether it's economic development, whether it's, you know, the environment. And I think what we try to do is we try to address those issues in simple kind of ways, right? If we only just put up this new program or this new service, we're going to get at this complex issue, and it's actually not the way to go. And so complexity says that we have to have lots more voices engaged in this work, because we need to bring all different perspectives around the table. Mark Chamberlain, who is a business leader in Hamilton and used to be the chair of the Hamilton Roundtable, I think he spoke in London a couple of times. He used to say, you know, whenever he would talk about poverty, the first thing he'd hear from the groups that he'd talk to is, I didn't know that. So we all carry a little bit of our community information, but we don't have the whole picture. So I didn't know that, and then how can I help? Because, you know, the real beauty of community is that no matter where we're coming from, we actually all have hopes and dreams for the success of our community and for the success, more importantly, for the success of the people in the community. So it's that kind of investing in that future, that possibility that I think is a really critical way to frame collective impact. So it's tough problems, but it's the possibility of a different kind of future that is the fusion of collective impact, I think.
Chantel.
I'm actually just wondering, what was it in your life that sparked it in you to care about such something that touches so many lives that so many people don't get to see? And why is it that you're so passionate about helping those less fortunate is what I really want to know. Please and thank you.
Wow. That's, I mean, I think, so I feel very uncomfortable telling people about my personal life, just because that's how it is. But I think it's embedded in my family history where, you know, my father and mother immigrated to Canada, and and my father was the type of person that would bring many people home at different times from different walks of life. And so our family experience was one of always having lots of people at our dinner table. And I think that probably, you know, that probably has driven me has driven me to really think about, you know, that we are all in community all the time, even though we may not recognize it. And then the other thing that I think really has been very impactful is, you know, the sense of possibility, right? The sense that we all, I really do believe that we all share so much in common, and that we all have a piece of the answer to the issue, and that we can come together collectively to figure these things out. We may not get the total solution, but certainly what we're seeing with collective impact is that communities are really, really moving the needle quite substantially on some pretty challenging problems. And so there's hope in that. You know, there's hope in this kind of work, and I think that everybody in the room probably shares those sentiments. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here today if you didn't think that there was hope and power in community. And I think, you know, as I travel to the United States quite frequently these days, I think there's something unique about the Canadian experience that can help us kind of really carve our niche in collective impact and collective work.